today on Ag News Daily.
Crop looks good, but it's kind of slow. We aren't developing, or we aren't stacking up very many growing degree days at this point. Things are really slow. And so think about the weeds that are out there as well. They're kind of slow in developing. We always tell folks we want weeds to be actively growing. And so we want that herbicide to get taken in and do its job.
Welcome back to the weekly edition of the Ag News Daily Show. We've got the month of May ending, Delaney, which means it's going to turn to June.
And June is dairy month, so you better enjoy some ice cream, some whole milk, some cheese, curds, or cheese.
I kind of like all of that
Me
stuff.
too.
And when it's been hot like this last week, I could use some ice cream. We do see some rain chances across parts of the Midwest going into the weekend, particularly parts of Missouri and areas further south. But much of the Corn Belt tends to stay drier over the next several days. Eastern portions of the region picked up heavier rainfall that came last weekend, which helped replenish some of the soil moisture in those areas. This dry stretch should allow producers to wrap up any and all planting or get caught up on that remaining field work, potentially get side dressing started as well. So we'll see dry conditions continue into next week, but there may be some isolated super dry spots in some areas. Across the northern plains, temps are expected to stay well above average this week and into the weekend with only limited chances for moisture in the Dakotas. Western portions of the region could see improved moisture conditions, but the eastern areas are continuing to face drought concerns if they continue to miss these rains. So overall, Delaney, it remains a favorable pattern for field activity across much of the Midwest, though I'm expecting producers to be nearly done. So they'll continue to watch closely for additional moisture opportunities as their crops are emerging and get into those early season growth stages.
You know, you talk about side dressing. Certainly that's going to be scattered, I would say, this year with just the variety of planting progress that we've seen across the nation. But the crop progress report released earlier this week shows planting progress across the Corn Belt is pretty much ahead of pace or near average pace, with corn planting across the top 18 producing states reaching 91% complete, ahead of last year's 86% and above the 5-year average of 83%, while soybeans reached 71% planted compared to the 5-year average of 68%. Corn emergence now reached 58% nationally, and soybean emergence reached 40% nationally. Looking at winter wheat conditions, they have been remaining mixed, with 52% rated good to excellent nationally, while topsoil moisture conditions across many Midwestern states continue trending mostly adequate heading into this late May fieldwork season. So we'll be right back with more news after this week's tips with Corteva Agriscience.
We know diseases were a big issue last year, southern rust in particular. So make sure that you've got a plan in place this year to go ahead and get those fungicides sprayed in a timely fashion.
We appreciate that tip. And now let's turn to watching the low water levels, as the past few weeks on the Mississippi River are putting pressure on increasing transportation costs. Now for American farmers, as drought conditions continue disrupting the barge traffic along one of the nation's most important agricultural shipping route. Seems like every year, Delaney, we get to talk about this. The barge operators have reduced cargo loads to prevent their vessels from running aground in those shallow sections of the river. This is driving freight rates from St. Louis to roughly 77% above the 3-year average during the recent low water periods. The higher shipping costs are increasing expenses for moving corn, soybeans, and wheat to the Gulf export terminals. So to note, nearly half of all the U.S. grain exports move through the Mississippi River system. This is making those river conditions a major concern for grain transportation and that export movement. As federal drought officials are stating, they also say the reduced traffic could slow fertilizer shipments and create additional supply chain challenges for agricultural producers, especially heading into future planting seasons. So hopefully we get some moisture and bring that back up to operating levels.
Well, certainly as we take a look here at some policy-related headlines, rural infrastructure is back in the headlines this week. The Fertilizer Institute voiced support of a new bipartisan bill which would provide surface transportation relief, and that proposal has advanced through the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, known as the Build America 250 Act. Industry leaders say the legislation would strengthen rural infrastructure, improve supply chain reliability, and support agricultural transportation nationwide. The TFI president and CEO Corey Rosenbusch said reliable transportation systems are essential for moving fertilizer and other agricultural products efficiently across the country. The organization, TFI, specifically praised the bill's focus on rural roads, bridges, and freight corridors that connect farms and agricultural facilities to major highways and export facilities. The Institute also noted that all fertilizer is transported by truck at least once in its lifetime before reaching farms, and they said that aging infrastructure continues to contribute to delays, inefficiencies, and higher transportation costs throughout the agricultural supply chain. I know there's certainly some roads in our area that could use a facelift, Tanner.
Yes, it certainly seems like we all have that. Well, we've got news coming out of China. They are halting their Brazilian beef imports, so we'll continue to keep an eye on that. As we look into this cattle news, China suspended those imports from 3 Brazilian meatpacking plants on May 20th after detecting synthetic veterinary hormones in the cattle. The affected facilities are operated by JBS, Prima Foods, and Frialto. That's my best guess at that pronunciation. China prohibits the use of certain synthetic hormones in their beef production, and the suspensions come as Brazil pushes to have expanded access to Chinese markets. It's the largest customer for beef exports. Brazilian officials recently requested approval for exports from an additional 33 meatpacking facilities. The latest restrictions add uncertainty to the beef trade between China and Brazil, as companies involved have not publicly commented on the suspensions. As Brazil's Beef Industry Association has also not indicated how long the restrictions may remain in effect. Certainly big news there coming out of that trading relationship.
Certainly going to be interesting to see how that impacts the U.S. supply chain moving as well. But as we look at our domestic cattle supply, the USDA released their first year-over-year increase in feedlot inventories in over a year and a half. On the May 22nd Cattle on Feed report, they showed cattle and calves on feed for slaughter markets and feedlots with capacity of 1,000 head or more totaled 11.6 million head as of May 1st. That total was up 2% from the same time last year and came in above analyst expectations. The increase, they say, was largely driven by a rise in April placements, which totaled 1.7 million head, up about 6% from a year ago. Analysts had expected a smaller placement number. The report also noted fed cattle marketings declined by 10% with drier weather conditions across parts of the plains, contributing to more cattle moving into feedlots, Tanner. So certainly some interesting headlines there to see how that is going to continue to impact the cattle markets. And if you didn't catch last week's show with Ted Seifert, we talk about this very subject. So I'd encourage you to go back and take a listen.
Well, we're going to stick on the livestock headlines. The livestock pests portion of the USDA has now opened their new research facility this week, May 27th, focusing on helping cattle producers protect their herds from insects and ticks that can impact animal health and profitability. The U.S. Livestock Insects Research Laboratory, which is located in Caryville, Texas, operated by the USDA's Agricultural Research Service. This will develop new tools to combat invasive pests, including New World screwworm, ticks, and disease-carrying flies. Agricultural Secretary Brooke Rollins says that the facility will strengthen our efforts to keep dangerous livestock pests out of the U.S. It is 52,000 square foot of laboratory space that will include research space, cattle handling facilities, and genomics center where scientists will study pests, control technologies, pesticide resistance, and new treatment methods, all aimed at reducing losses and improving herd health. It's a pretty big facility there, just lined up to help our beef producers.
Lots of beef headlines today, Tanner. We were talking about a new disease detected in Nebraska, Theileria. That is a new one. I don't know if I've heard of that before, but the Nebraska Department of Agriculture announced earlier this week on May 26th that Theileria, which is a tick-borne parasite affecting cattle, has been detected in several Nebraska counties. State officials say that imported cattle tested positive for the disease, though the Asian longhorned tick, which is the primary carrier responsible for spreading the parasite, has not yet been found in Nebraska. This new tick has already become established in 26 other states. And the state veterinarian of Nebraska, Roger Dudley, is urging producers to closely monitor cattle for symptoms, including anemia, jaundice, loss of appetite, weakness, exercise intolerance, and, in some cases, death. Officials say there are currently no approved vaccines or treatments available on the market for Theileria, making tick control and herd management extremely critical during the summer months when ticks are, of course, most active. Producers who suspect signs of the disease are encouraged to contact a veterinarian immediately. And I know certainly here we've seen a lot of ticks out in the yard on the dogs. Tanner, it is maybe a heavy tick season, especially here in the Midwest. But we'll be back with more agriculture news right after this short break.
Introducing this year's Instinct Next Gen and N-Serve nitrogen stabilizers, featuring the same leading active as always, and now announcing nothing new, because our performance still leads every competitor.
Our nitrogen stabilizers aren't new. They're proven with thousands of field trials and decades of experience leading the competition. No gimmicks, no empty promises. Now that deserves some hype.
Go to Corteva.us/hype to learn more.
Well, Delaney, shifting from livestock health concerns to our crop outlook. The agricultural economists are now projecting improved grain prices heading into this growing season. Economists with the University of Illinois have updated their 2026 crop budgets just this week, reflecting that improved grain prices and rising input concerns are tied to this conflict involving Iran and the Strait of Hormuz. The economist Nick Paulson said, as these updated projections now show corn prices running 25 to 35 cents higher than their January estimates, while soybean prices have increased by roughly $1 per bushel. Paulson said the stronger pricing outlook has noticeably improved projected returns for the 2026 crop year. I'd say if prices go up, it probably helps projections. Paulson also said the ongoing conflict has increased concerns surrounding fuel costs, fertilizer costs, but while these fertilizer expenses are not expected to have a significant impact on the 26 budgets, on average, he notes that this elevated price could become a larger issue as we head into the 2027 growing year. If conditions continue not to improve, diesel fuel costs are already projected to run about 50% higher than they were 3 months ago, which could increase harvest expense later this year. Despite those concerns, Paulson said the higher commodity prices are currently expected to outweigh any of the rising input costs in their projection for 2026.
Well, Tanner, meanwhile, efforts to support long-term grain demand continued overseas this week during a sustainability conference hosted in Japan. The U.S. Grains and Bioproducts Council hosted its U.S. Feed Grains and Sustainability Conference in Tokyo last week, bringing together roughly 100 Japanese buyers and end users to discuss sustainable U.S. grain production and trade opportunities. Grains Council representatives highlighted sustainability practices used by American farmers and took the opportunity to showcase tools designed to help international customers import more U.S. agricultural products. Former USGBC chairwoman and New Mexico sorghum farmer Verity Ulibarri joined Director of Global Sustainability Carlos Suarez in presenting information on land stewardship and sustainability verification programs. The council officials also met with Japan's Ministry of Agriculture, Forestry, and Fisheries to discuss sustainable agricultural development and future trade opportunities. Following, of course, the conference, the USGBC team participated in additional industry roundtable discussions with buyers focused on sustainable metrics and the use of U.S. feed grains in aquaculture feed applications, which is, of course, a huge market within the Japanese marketplace. So love to see updates like that going out to promote U.S. agriculture.
USGBCB,
that was a big acronym, I know.
I'm glad you got that one. Well, let's take a look at this story here. Enrollment is now open for the 2026 Farmers for Soil Health program. This is a farmer-led initiative that focuses on expanding the cover crop adoption in 20 states. In comments that were released on May 22nd, the executive director, Ben West, said the coalition, which is led by the National Corn Growers Association, the United Soybean Board, and the National Pork Board, they launched this effort after several years of collaboration on their sustainability goals. Now, farmers can enroll through August 31st, which the program is offering up to $35 per acre for eligible crop acres through a simple online sign-up process with no long-term contract requirements. This program is especially relevant for Midwestern crop farmers, as many operations are continuing to look for other ways to improve their soil health, manage weather-related challenges in the field, and West says that the coalition hopes to increase cover crop adoption by creating a process that is quick, fast, painless for producers, while also helping offset some of the costs during a difficult farm economy. Farmers can enroll both new and existing cover crop acres on a year-to-year basis, with most verification handled remotely and technical support still available through this program. That's a good headline for today.
That's the one question I have is, can you layer that with other cover crop programs?
We can look into that.
Well, bring that back. The American Soybean Association is urging federal officials to quickly finalize guidance for the Section 45Z Clean Fuel Production Credit. We had some recent testimony this week, yesterday, May 28th, before the U.S. Treasury Department and the IRS. ASA Secretary Jordan Scott, a South Dakota soybean farmer, said certainty surrounding the biofuel tax credit is critical for maintaining soybean demand and supporting farm income during a challenging farm economy like the one we're currently facing. Scott noted that recent changes to the program that remove indirect land use change penalties on agricultural feedstocks, improving the competitiveness of soy-based biofuels. He also encouraged federal officials to finalize the guidance before the 2026 harvest season and continue developing policies that reward climate-smart farming practices. So I know Mitchell Hora is probably cheering from the sidelines on that headline as well, Tanner.
Well, we've got a Summit pipeline update as the debate continues. Iowa landowners and agricultural groups continue to voice their opposing views this week over the proposed route change to the Summit Carbon Solutions carbon pipeline project. During a May 20th hearing and meeting with the Iowa Utilities Commission, several landowners asked regulators to deny Summit's request to modify their pipeline route through Iowa. Summit announced earlier in May that it updated its proposal and would remove routes through Shelby, Pottawatomie, Montgomery, Adams, Page, Fremont, Mitchell, and Worth counties. Sound like a list of friends, almost. While reducing that mileage through Sioux, Crawford, Floyd, and Dickinson counties, the company says the revised proposal would reduce the project by about 200 miles and affect roughly 400 fewer landowners. While many landowners continue to raise their concerns over the eminent domain and long-term uncertainty surrounding the project, some agricultural groups urged the commission to approve this revised plan quickly. Now, the Iowa Corn Growers Association and Iowa Renewable Fuels Association said that the pipeline could support Iowa's ethanol industry, with the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association estimating that the project could have or generate nearly $2 billion annually in additional revenue from the carbon capture use and sequestration effort tied to 27 ethanol plants. The Iowa Utilities Commission has not announced a timeline for its next decision on this project.
Well, Tanner, as we look at post-emergence applications beginning across the country, growers are turning their attention to weed control, nutrient management, and protecting yield here early in the growing season. We're going to be chatting today with Jeff Moon, Market Development Specialist with Corteva Agriscience, to talk about all of this and more. So let's turn it over to that conversation with Jeff now. Well, certainly as farmers are getting into the field or starting to think about field work for the spring, post-emergence and application certainly comes to mind. And we're going to be chatting about that today with Jeff Moon, the Market Development Specialist for Corteva Agriscience. Jeff, thanks for joining us on the podcast this week.
You're welcome. Great to be here with you today.
Jeff, before we get into a little bit of some of the thoughts that farmers should have in mind right now as we get into the application season, tell us a little bit more about your role as a market development specialist. What does that mean that you're doing day to day?
Sure. So my main role as a market development specialist is working with my team, which is a group of 9 territory managers across Minnesota and Wisconsin. And I'm a product resource for them, product technical resource. So questions about our products, about labels, about tank mixing, about issues that might pop up in the field. I'm a resource available for that team that they can use to help solve some problems. I visit with a lot of retailers. We end up talking with a lot of growers as well. So that's the role that I fulfill here across the states of Minnesota and Wisconsin.
Well, certainly, as you mentioned in your neck of the woods before we started recording, crops are looking good. Farmers have things planted, and that's certainly the case here in central Iowa as well. And it seems like things are moving quickly this year, and side dressing is right around the corner, as well as nitrogen application and a lot of other tools that soon growers will be using. As we're getting into that, what reminders should farmers keep in mind this year so that they get the best use out of their herbicides, fungicides, and other products post-emergence?
Well, there's a few things we can visit about. There's all sorts of things, but a few things I like to remind people about is, get out in the field and see what's going on. Get out there and do some scouting. That's really important that you get out there, whether you do it yourself or maybe someone from the retailer that you use does that for you, or maybe you contract with a consultant that does that. Get some boots on the ground, or heck, maybe you even use a drone to go out and do some of those things, but see what's going on and make sure you understand what weeds are out there. Weeds can grow quickly. Things can change in a hurry. We might have some 2-inch tall water hemp out there today, and we're preparing to pull the trigger to go ahead and spray, and maybe we get a rain delay that comes in and keeps us out of the field for a few days, and all of a sudden those weeds go from 2 inches to 6 inches overnight, it seems like. And so, being prepared, being ready, knowing what you're going to use. But keep in mind, we want to target those weeds when they're small. That's where our best success is. And so we tell people to keep in mind, 4 to 6 inch weeds is probably that target zone for you. And water hemp might even be a little bit earlier, as quick as that one grows. But timing is critical, and getting out there on the early side is important. And then when it comes to the herbicides and fungicides that they're going to be using, things can change depending on the weather that we have out there. And so we can run into a real wet pattern, which can change the pest profile a little bit, or some really hot, dry weather, again, which can change that pest profile. So just make sure that you're current on what's out there by doing that scouting and seeing what's going on and paying attention to the weather conditions, which can change things as well. And then, there's really a few things that I recommend for a successful application, and that's looking at the label and reading the label. It's not very exciting to read those labels, but it's really important that you read that label. It will advise you on rates and timing and tank mixes. All of those things are going to be on that label. And so before you go ahead and spray that out there, you've invested a fair amount of money in these products. Make sure you know what you're doing and you know how you're going to execute that so you have the best success that you can have out there. And it really starts with the label. Another thing to keep in mind would be some application equipment. If you're doing the application on your own, make sure you're starting with a clean sprayer. You don't want to have any residue from earlier this spring or even last year that's still in there that could mess something up. You want to make sure everything is clean. You want to make sure it's working right. Check your nozzles, check your hoses, check the filters, all those things, again, to make sure that we don't have any trouble that we run into when we're in the field. And then lastly, there's a lot of resources out there that a grower can utilize. One of them is their local retailer. They're a really good resource to offer advice in case you have to make some changes to your plans. They know what's going on in the area. They're working with a lot of different growers. They see a lot of fields, so they can offer some really good advice to you. They can also reach out to their local Corteva territory manager, to see if there's a particular question that comes up. So using that retailer as a resource would be another thing that I would recommend to growers.
Jeff, the other thing that comes to mind before we talk about side dressing is weather conditions. Obviously, wind conditions are really important, but what about rain and colder weather? We've had a lot of patches of cooler weather, even as we head into summertime. What are some weather condition considerations that farmers should be making right now?
Yeah, in fact, I've been getting a few questions the last days about this. We're a little cooler than normal, I would say, at this point in time. The crop looks good, but it's kind of slow, at least in the area that I work. We aren't developing, or we aren't stacking up very many growing degree days at this point. Things are really slow, and so think about the weeds that are out there as well. They're kind of slow in developing. So we always tell folks we want weeds to be actively growing. And so we want that herbicide to get taken in and do its job. If the weather conditions are such that the weeds aren't actively growing, they aren't going to take in that herbicide as well. And so the control is going to take a little bit longer, or might not be as effective as what you thought it was had we been a little bit warmer. So we've had some mornings here that have been down near freezing. In fact, just yesterday, I had some frost at my place here in central Minnesota. And so it takes a long time for those weeds and those crops to wake up and get going again. And so let's make sure the temperatures are good when we're out there making those applications. The other side of that is the crop itself. If we're in some cooler conditions, it's going to take maybe a little bit longer for that herbicide to break down inside of that plant. That herbicide is getting sprayed on everything out there. It doesn't know the difference between a corn plant or a bean plant or a water hemp. It's just that the corn or the bean plant is going to be able to break that down and get it out of its system. The corn plant might not be operating as efficiently as it would in some warmer weather. And so those weather conditions can be important. Another consideration when weather is maybe less than ideal is make sure we're using the right adjuvants. They're maybe even more important when the conditions are less than ideal to help those herbicides work and get the job done. So make sure we're using what needs to be used out there. And if an adjustment needs to be made, again, visiting with your retailer, they can provide a lot of expertise when it comes to that recommendation.
Jeff, it's interesting to note Corteva shared this information with us that many farmers are planning to side dress nitrogen mid-season rather than applying all of it up front. My first question is, what's the intention behind doing that? What does that provide to the plant longer term?
Nitrogen is a complex nutrient. It's really important. It's essential. The bad thing about nitrogen is it can move on us. It can get away. And so there's lots of different ways that we can manage nitrogen. When we put it out there, for the most part, it's in a stable form, the ammonium form. But over time, it converts to the nitrate form. And that nitrate form is also usable. The corn plant can use both forms, ammonium and nitrate. But when it's in that nitrate form, it's more subject to move. And so once it converts over to that nitrate form, and then we get some moisture that comes along, it can drive that nitrogen out of the root zone and put it to a spot where we can't get at it. And so people have found different ways to fight that. And one of those is doing some side dress applications. So we're putting that nitrogen out there closer to the time that the corn plant is going to use it. And so there's less chance for maybe loss versus putting it out earlier in the spring. A lot of these, if you think about the spring weather that we have, typically we get those heavier spring rains in May and maybe into early June. And then the summer, tends to dry up a little bit. And so our chances for loss here are early in the season in these spring rains. And so by putting it out as a side dress application or a top dress, however you want to talk about that, less chance for loss because we're closer when the corn plant's going to use it. And then the other way we can help manage that would be through the use of a stabilizer. We've got a couple of them here at Corteva. One is Instinct that gets used with urea or 28%, or at other times of the year even with manure. And then we have N-Serve, which can be used with anhydrous ammonia. And both those products, they have the same molecule, And what they do is they help keep that nitrogen in the ammonium form for a longer period of time. They slow that breakdown to the nitrate form. And so by keeping it in the ammonium form, it's going to stabilize it or keep it in place so it's there where the corn plant can get at it. And that's the whole idea behind using a stabilizer like N-Serve or Instinct. So side dressing is one way to go about that. Using a stabilizer is another piece of that they could consider. And then the form of nitrogen is important as well. Folks maybe use a different form of nitrogen based on the time of year. Maybe they put on some fall anhydrous, and in the spring they use urea or liquid fertilizer. And at top dress time or side dress time, they're looking at using some liquid. So it kind of depends on the time of the year. And again, what the cultural practices are where that grower is located.
Well, certainly, as you mentioned, this is a year where we're going to be watching inputs very closely. And so every application needs to make sure it's tied to some ROI. So I appreciate you making that connection for us. Is there any other advice that you have for growers who are going to be applying nitrogen in season?
Well, again, I would encourage them to, a lot of things we talk about on the herbicide side about the right rate and the timing, really important when it comes to that nitrogen. It's one of the more, as you talk about return on investment, one of the more expensive inputs that a grower has is nitrogen. And so we really want to make sure it's in the right place at the right time. So, right rate, right product, right rate, right time. We really want to focus on that when we're dealing with nitrogen. And, I mentioned before, N-Serve and Instinct. These aren't new products. They've been around for a long time. N-Serve, almost 50 years it's been in the marketplace. But the message is the same. The science is the same of how that works and what it does in the soil. And it's proven across the Corn Belt. Lots of use on farms, lots of university research that's been done with these products. And they kind of are the gold standard when it comes to managing nitrogen. And so if you're interested in that, reach out and talk to your retailer about that. And they'd be happy to share some information about that, but then also help you with those other things we talked about as well, as far as the right product, the right rate, the right time, making sure we're making a smart decision with our investments.
Fantastic. Well, Jeff, before we let you go, if any of our listeners have further questions about Corteva's portfolio, where should they go to find more information?
You bet. There's really three things that I recommend. A, go back to that retailer. They're a good source of information. If they've got a question that they can't quite answer, they can always reach out to us at Corteva, and one of our territory managers would be happy to get involved in answering some questions. But if you're at home, if you're in the tractor, and you've got some time from edge to edge there with all the technology that we have, you can look us up at corteva.com/US, and you can find all sorts of information there about our products, and you can learn more about those products at that site.
Fantastic. Well, Jeff, thanks again for joining us on the podcast. Certainly appreciate your insight.
Thanks for having me today.
Appreciate those insights, Delaney. But what have we seen happening in the markets this week?
Well, inflation was reported to climb to the highest level in 3 years, creating some uncertainty across commodity markets and largely driven by higher energy prices. So I'm sure we'll see some updates here from the Federal Reserve shortly on that front. Energy markets weakened following reports of a possible extension of U.S.-Iran peace negotiations, though uncertainty remains after President Trump signaled dissatisfaction with the current proposal. So certainly going to see up and downs there as we see more headlines coming out of that region. Cattle markets found some support this week from technical buying and stronger demand tied to the start of the U.S. grilling season. And soybeans gained support this week from strong product demand, while corn continued to benefit from steady export sales, active export demand, and strong feed usage. Expectations for soybean acreage expansion may be also fading due to recent weather, planting conditions, replants in some area, and easing input costs, helping support corn prices despite pressure from weaker wheat markets as well. So that's a quick look at the market headlines this week, Tanner, and what's driving things there.
Yes, absolutely. Listeners, thanks again for joining us, catching up on your latest headlines and always those fun interviews. So check back again next week. Watch all of our social media. We appreciate those follows. But should we let them go?
Let's let them go.